Welcome back to another Onshape video tutorial for Bryanston School. This is the second extension task for the Bluetooth speaker models. In the previous extension task we added in the screw holes to hold on the speakers to our casing. In this video we are going to see how to make the actual screws and nuts that would be used to attach the speaker to the casing. So open up the model that you were working on previously. In this case I was using the oval speaker. And you'll see here are the holes that we did in the last tutorial. If you haven't done that already, go back and look at Bluetooth speaker extension video 1. What we're going to do is we're going to create a new part studio in which to model the screws and the nuts that we're going to use. And although we would normally need 8 screws and 8 nuts to attach the speakers, we're only going to need to model one of each, and then we can take those into an assembly in the final video, which will be video number 5 in this series. So let's left click on the little plus sign in the bottom left hand corner, and I'm going to left click on Create Part Studio, and that brings us over to another part studio at the bottom. Now after a while, having lots of different part studios can get a bit confusing. So I'm going to right click on Part Studio 2, and I'm going to then left click on Rename, and I'm just going to simply call this Fasteners, because that's what we're going to create, the fasteners. Now the next step I can do really, I suppose, on any of the work planes, but if we think about the orientation of our model, so I just go back to Part Studio 1 where our speaker is, what we really want to do, I suppose, is to create our fasteners in the orientation that makes it very easy to assemble. So if I go back to the fasteners part studio, I want to create the fasteners on the right work plane. So I'm going to hover over the right work plane till it's highlighted, right click, and then left click on New Sketch on the menu that appears. I'm going to press the N key so that I'm viewing normal to. Remember, you can also right click and select View Normal to Sketch Plane as well. Now I'm going to start off at the origin. Remember, the origin is where the 3 work planes all intersect each other, and I'm going to use the corner rectangle tool. So corner rectangle. I'm going to start in the origin, and I'm just going to drag up and to the right, and then I'm going to dimension that. So I'm going to use the dimension tool, and I'm going to select the length. So left click on the length, and I'm going to make that 12 millimeters, and then I can just zoom in using the scroll wheel on the mouse, and I'm going to make the height of the rectangle 2 millimeters. This is going to be the threaded part of the screw. We're actually going to rotate it. So what we need to now add on is the head. So to add the head, I'm going to use the line tool, and I'm simply going to, from the top left corner of the rectangle, make sure it's highlighted, left click, drag a line out at about 45 degrees, left click, come down to the top work plane, left click, and then go back to the origin and left click, and that creates our shape. I'm now going to dimension that. So the first thing I'm going to do with the dimension tool is left click on the top work plane, and then left click on that angled line, and then just click over here out the way, and I'm going to change that to 45 degrees. So I'm just entering 4 and 5 on the keyboard, and I'm then going to dimension the length of this vertical line. So left click on the line, come away, left click to place the dimension, and that's going to be 4 millimeters. So enter 4 on the keyboard, press return, and you can see it's auto adjusted. Now I can get away with just revolving this, but just to make the sketch a proper sketch, I'm going to use the trim tool, and I'm going to trim away the line that's in the middle. Now I can revolve this shape to create the shape of the screw. So I'm going to left click on the revolve tool, and I'm going to left click in revolve axis, and I'm just going to click on this bottom line of the rectangle, and you can see that it looks like it's mirrored, but if I hold the right mouse button down and turn that around, you can see that I've got the shape of the screw. So I'm going to left click on the tick to make sure I'm happy with that. I now need to put a hole in here that's hexagonal in shape for an Allen key. So I'm going to right click on this surface, left click on new sketch, and then press N for normal 2 so that we're viewing in on top of the screw head. I'm going to use the Polygon tool, left click on that, left click in the middle, and then just drag out. And if I move the mouse around, you can see that I can change the orientation. I'm going to get it so that it's roughly horizontal, and then left click. Now as I move the mouse now, you can see that I can change the number of sides. So as I move the mouse up and down, I can go from a triangle, equilateral triangle, to a square, to a pentagon, to a hexagon. It's a hexagon I want, so I'm going to left click. Oh, okay, now I just moved the mouse, I did it, and it came up with 7 sides, so I can edit that. So turn off the Polygon tool, I can double click on the number 7, and I can change that to 6, and that's taken us back to the hexagon. Now although it doesn't really matter, what I like to do is to line this up. So I'm going to use a constraint tool. Now remember, the constraints might all be hidden under one constraint under an arrow, similar to this. Because I've got quite a wide screen here that I'm filming on, I've got a set of constraints that are already on display to me. I'm going to pick the horizontal constraint, and I'm going to click on the bottom straight edge of my hexagon. The next thing I want to do is to dimension that. So I'm going to use the dimension tool, and I'm going to click on 2 opposite faces. So that face and that face of the hexagon, or edges of the hexagon. Left click to place it, and I'm going to change that to 2.5 millimeters. So enter in 2.5 on the keyboard, because that's the size of the hole for the Allen key in the screw. And I'm now going to remove that piece of material from the head. So I'm going to left click on extrude. I'm going to change the distance to 3, and at the moment you can see it wants to add it on. I'm going to left click on remove. It will swap direction, and it will remove it going into the material. Left click to finish that off. So that's our basic screw done. Now it just looks a little bit neater if we put a chamfer on this end. It looks a bit more like a screw then. So I'm going to use the chamfer tool. I'm going to change the distance to 0.7, and I'm then going to left click on the end and left click on the tick, and that is the screw drawn. The next thing I want to do is to draw the nut, which is going to be a separate part, but I'm going to draw it in the same part studio. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to left click on the eye next to part 1. In fact, what I will do first is I'll right click on part 1, and I'll rename that, and I'll call it M4 and CS for countersunk screw. So I've renamed that part, and I'm now going to click on the little eye, which makes that part disappear. I'm going to move on to, so I'm hovering over the front work plane, so I'm going to right click on the front work plane, left click on new sketch, and either press N on the keyboard for normal 2, or right click and left click view normal to sketch plane. So I'm now going to create the nut. So the first thing I do is use a center point circle on the origin, left click, drag out the circle. And I'm now going to dimension that because it's going to be quite small and everything else would change shape if I drew the outside of the nut. Let's dimension this first of all. So left click to place the dimension. That's going to be 4 millimeters in diameter. To type in 4, hit enter. I can then use the scroll wheel to zoom in. I'm going to use another inscribed polygon. So left click to place the center, drag it out, left click to place it, and it's defaulted to 6, so I'm going to leave it there, and so left click again. Now remember, I can edit that if I want to by coming off the Polygon tool. So I'm going to use the horizontal tool again to set a horizontal